In January 2017, FIFA held a vote that would change the World Cup forever. The proposal was simple on paper: expand the tournament from 32 teams to 48. Add 16 more nations. Make the biggest sporting event in the world even bigger. It passed by a wide margin, and immediately two very different reactions followed. One side called it the most significant step forward in football's history, a genuine opening of the sport to nations that had been waiting at the door for decades and never been let in. The other side called it a disaster, that it would dilute the competition, that it was a money grab dressed up as principle, that the World Cup's prestige came from how difficult it was to qualify, and that lowering the barrier would make it less meaningful to get in. Both sides had a point, but to understand who was actually right and why the vote even happened in the first place, you have to go back further than 2017. The 32-team World Cup had been in place since France 1998. Before that, 24 teams from 1982. And each time the format expanded, the same predictions appeared. Quality would drop, prestige would erode, and each time the tournament survived and often became better for it. But from 1998 to 2026 is 28 years. And in those 28 years, global football changed dramatically, while the World Cup format stayed exactly where it was. Professional leagues developed in the United States, Japan, South Korea, and across Africa. Youth infrastructure improved in countries that previously had almost none. The technical gap between football's traditional powers and the rest of the world narrowed in ways that anyone watching qualifying could see clearly. And yet the distribution of World Cup spots barely moved. Africa, over 1 billion people, more than 50 nations, deep football cultures across the continent, had 5 spots in a 32-team field. Asia had 4.5. Oceania had none guaranteed. Meanwhile, Europe held 13 spots. South America 4.5, with historically strong odds in any playoff. The argument that this was simply fair, that it reflected genuine quality differences, became harder to defend, as those differences visibly narrowed. Japan beat Germany and Spain at the 2022 World Cup. Morocco reached the semifinal. South Korea eliminated Germany in 2018. These were not flukes. They were the result of decades of football development that the quota system had simply failed to keep pace with. And that growing tension between a format frozen in 1998 and a football world that had moved well past it is what eventually created the pressure for change. But pressure alone does not move FIFA. For that, you need money. FIFA's revenue model depends almost entirely on the World Cup. Broadcasting rights, sponsorship deals, licensing agreements. Every 4 years, these generate billions of dollars that fund the organization's operations. And the logic of expansion, from a financial perspective, was not complicated. More matches means more airtime to sell. More nations in the tournament means more countries with a direct stake in what happens on the pitch, which means more local broadcasters competing for rights, which drives fees higher. FIFA's own projections consistently pointed towards significantly greater revenue from a 48-team format. The direction never changed, regardless of which specific numbers you trusted. FIFA also had a particular reason to care about this in 2017. The corruption scandals of 2015 and 2016, the FBI investigations, the indictments of senior officials, the forced resignations, had left the organization under serious institutional pressure. Growing revenue through a structural reform was one way to signal recovery, to demonstrate that FIFA could generate money legitimately through football without the backroom arrangements that had been exposed. Whether that framing was sincere or convenient depended on who you asked. But what is clear is that the financial argument and the idealistic one, more inclusion, more global reach, were both pointing in exactly the same direction. And when principle and profit align that cleanly, decisions inside large organizations tend to get made very quickly, which brings us to the man who actually made it happen. And when Gianni Infantino was elected FIFA president in February 2016, replacing Sepp Blatter in the immediate aftermath of the corruption crisis, he ran on a platform of reform and growth, and one of his central promises was expanding the World Cup. His argument was that it was fundamentally unjust for countries to work 4 years through qualifying to finish second or third in their regional group and go home with nothing, while the same cluster of European and South American nations occupied their spots almost automatically. He framed the expansion as a matter of fairness, of making the sport honest about how widely it was actually played. He also needed votes. FIFA's Congress gives equal weight to member associations from every football-playing nation in the world. The smaller nations, those in Africa, Asia, Oceania, and the Caribbean who stood to gain the most from expansion, held significant collective influence, and those nations overwhelmingly wanted more spots. It would be unfair to reduce Infantino's position to pure calculation. The underlying argument has genuine merit, but the expansion served his political interests inside FIFA's power structure, and that alignment of personal belief and institutional convenience made the outcome far easier to achieve than it might otherwise have been. This is how most large institutional changes actually work. Rarely is it one thing, principle alone, or money alone, or politics alone. Usually it is all three arriving at the same conclusion at the same time. And once that happens, the only real debate left is the one that critics had been trying to have all along, whether the football itself would suffer. The most persistent criticism of the 48-team format is the quality argument. More nations means weaker nations. Weaker nations means one-sided matches. One-sided matches means a group stage that feels like a formality rather than a competition. There is some truth in it. A team qualifying as one of the 8 best third-place sides across 12 groups is almost certainly not among the 48 strongest football nations by any strict technical ranking. But the argument has a flaw that its supporters tend to overlook. The 32-team format never eliminated poor group stage matches. It just had fewer teams. The 2022 World Cup produced several heavily one-sided results. The 2018 group stage had matches settled well before 90 minutes. The idea that the old field was a collection of evenly matched opponents is not supported by the history of the competition. More importantly, the new format changes the incentive structure of the group stage entirely. Because the 8 best third-place teams across all 12 groups also advance, no team can afford to stop competing early. There are no safe draws. There is no match where a team can play conservatively and accept a quiet exit. Every point, in every group against every opponent, matters to the very last minute. That does not guarantee high-quality football, but it guarantees that the football being played always means something, and that is a different thing, arguably the more important one. But even setting the quality debate aside entirely, there is another dimension to this expansion that the critics rarely address. One that has less to do with the football on the pitch and more to do with what the tournament actually represents to the people watching it. For Cape Verde, a small island nation off the west coast of Africa with a population of around 600,000 people, qualifying for the 2026 World Cup is not a footnote. It is the most significant moment in the country's sporting history. Players in that squad grew up watching World Cups on television, knowing from an early age that their country simply did not have enough margin in the qualification structure to ever get there. Now they are there. For Jordan, for Curacao, for Uzbekistan, each carries a version of the same story. The players who make it will be remembered in those countries, not because of how many goals they score, but because they got there at all. In the entire history of football in those nations, no squad before them had managed it. People who argue these teams do not belong are making a point about technical quality on a football pitch, but they are missing what the World Cup is actually for, which is not simply to produce the highest level of football in every match, but to make the sport feel genuinely global and genuinely meaningful to everyone who loves it, everywhere in the world. So when you bring it all back together, the format frozen for 28 years, the financial pressure, the politics inside FIFA, the quality debate, and the 4 nations stepping onto this stage for the first time, the answer to why FIFA expanded to 48 teams is not one thing. It was money. It was politics. It was a man who needed votes and believed in his own argument at the same time. It was decades of football development in parts of the world the quota system had undervalued. The 2026 tournament will have group stage matches that are not close. Critics will point to those and say they told you so. But there will also be moments that could not have existed under the old format.